Hello and welcome again to our reflections on the upcoming scripture readings, this time for the 17th Sunday of the year. The first reading comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verses 20 to 32, from the letter to the Colossians, chapter 2, verses 12 through 14, and from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, verses 1 through 13. This week we will see that the first reading from Genesis continues another story involving Abraham, as we did last time. So perhaps we could begin with that. You remember that in our last reflection, Abraham had welcomed 3 guests to his home, that he had provided hospitality to them, that they had mentioned that Sarah, on their return, would be with child and bear a son, and they now leave. Abraham leaves with these 3 guests. Remember that they had not said why they were there or where they were going. But as they go along, and Abraham apparently accompanies them a little bit of the way, says that they are going to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that the reason for their visit is that they are going to bring an end to those cities because they have been so sinful. It's at this point, and it's a very interesting story, that we find Abraham haggling with these 3 visitors. Now, it is clear in the narration that these 3 visitors are none other than the divine, than the Lord. And in haggling, of course, in discussion and bartering, I guess, would be certainly a policy that was very familiar in the ancient world. When you bought something or when you were going to find an item, the way in which you did was you kind of haggled or bartered over it. So, for example, even today in the Middle East sometimes, if you go to the marketplace, you see an item you like, say a coat, and you say, how much is it? And they say, oh, $35. Well, if you pay the $35 right away, they know you don't know the system, okay? So what you would do, if they say $35, you'll say, I'll give you $20. All right, and now the haggling goes on, okay? Oh, this is much too good for that. But, all right, I'll make a deal with you. Let's maybe pay, you can have it for $30. Well, that's still too much, but look, I'll give you $22. See, and so what happens is they move to the price that perhaps both of them knew in the end they were going to do. All right, so that's the whole process of bartering, or haggling, if you want. In the Western world, to do this kind of thing, we would say that the winner one side takes advantage over the other, becomes a winner, and one becomes a loser. In the Middle Eastern culture, both parties know at the beginning what needs to be done. See, so it's not going to be a surprise that you, for example, bought your coat at $28.50 or whatever. See, that was a surprise. No, they knew where it was going. So that might keep in mind as this takes place. So Abraham, when he hears that Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed, says to the visitors, says to God, look, God is a God of justice, a God of mercy, and if there were in this city, Sodom, 50 loyal, faithful, just people, would you destroy them? Would a God of justice destroy a city or a people if there were 50 just there? And this now begins the process where, God says, all right, if there were just 40 there, then I would destroy them and not destroy the whole city if there were 40 just. Well, Abraham says, now look, what if there were less than 40? And so, without going through the whole story, as you will hear, this kind of back and forth takes place till they get down to 10, where Abraham says, if there were 10 just men in Sodom, would you spare it? And the visitor says, yes, if there were just 10, we would spare the city. Now, 10, of course, is an important number in Jewish thought. 10 makes the minimal number of believing men to make a community, to make a group. So kinship relationships were very important here, and the argument is based on the fact that God is, after all, Lord of all peoples, and so therefore in a kinship relation, if some are good, should they not be protected? And if the goodness of some is important, maybe all would benefit from it. So Abraham here is pictured as arguing for humans, human creation. Look, Lord God, if you can find, 50, 40, 45, etc., 10. Now, the truth of the matter is that there are not 10 just men in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, both sides knew that really in the beginning, but nevertheless, the opportunity to consider the justice of God, the fairness of God, is brought out in this discussion. So the image of God that is developed in this particular episode that we hear is that God is a God of justice. And Abraham reminds God that he is, however, God is a God of the just. Sodom and Gomorrah later will be destroyed because the only just family in Sodom was Lot and his family, namely his wife and his sons. And by the way, Sodom is ultimately destroyed because it was not hospitable to strangers. So this kind of continues the theme that we've seen over the last 2 weeks. Hospitality, making a stranger feel a guest, was exactly what Sodom didn't do, and thus remained its destruction. All right, we come now to the gospel. The gospel begins, chapter 11, where Jesus is pictured as praying. Now, we've mentioned this before, that very often in Luke's gospel, more so than in the other gospel, Jesus is pictured as praying. Now, what exactly the prayer of Jesus is, we are not sure. But when Jesus is finished praying, the disciples say to Jesus, "Teach us to pray as John taught his disciples to pray." Now, keep in mind, they pray. It isn't that this is the first time that the disciples are praying. No, but what was the uniqueness of the prayer or the way to pray that Jesus wanted his disciples to have? It is here that we receive a version of the famous prayer of Jesus. There are two versions of this, the Lucan one that we hear this time and the Matthean one. The Matthean one, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," of course is the one that becomes our regular prayer and the one that is used regularly at liturgy. Luke's is shorter and may well be the original of the two patterns. We do believe that Matthew is the one who adds certain aspects to the prayer that we regularly use. So, how does this prayer go that Jesus is pictured teaching his disciples? "Father, may your name be holy. May your kingdom come. Give to us every day the bread we need. Forgive us our sins, for we ourselves also forgive everyone who owes us. Do not lead us into testing. Now, that's one of the ways in which this prayer of Luke, as Jesus teaches it, is told. Now, the readings that we will hear this weekend make a few little changes. So, for example, may your name be holy, we will say, hallowed be your name. But notice the sameness here. May your kingdom come, we will pray, your kingdom come. Give us today the bread we need. Give us each day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, etc., etc. We ourselves forgive everyone in debt to us. And then do not be subject to the final test, remains the same. So there are some slight translation difficulties, or differences rather, just so that you're aware of it. As this prayer unfolds, it certainly follows a particularly traditional pattern, by the way. How do you do this? Well, first of all, and this is a model for prayer, praise the Father, in this case, as children are to praise their Father. The Father does things that no human can achieve, but that God easily can. So hallowed one's name, be in truth who you really are. God is really the one who can provide. Your kingdom come. Well, achieve, we hope, in our time and in our day, a kingly dominion once and for always over all life. So God's kingdom is the kingdom of the world. Then the prayer asks for three things: daily sustenance, forgiveness of sins, and preservation from temptation or testing. Remember, in this gospel, there are always this idea of testing. We saw that when Jesus was coming out of the Jordan and being led into the desert. We saw this when the lawyer was testing Jesus. Remember, who is my neighbor? And now the prayer asks that we be delivered from testing, which will take us away from keeping loyalty to the Father and to God. So the prayer certainly is a wonderful model. And the reason seems to be here why Luke includes this is that John had taught his disciples to pray. And as we've mentioned before, and we will see again in this gospel, John the Baptist, that is frequently mentioned because there was this ongoing kind of presence of two sets of believers in the time of Luke. The believers in Jesus and his message, the believer in John and his message. So this very beautiful and important prayer is brought to our attention. Teach us to pray is what the disciples say. But again, I mentioned this. We're not sure, by the way, and I just pause a moment here, that they request a specific prayer that would be different, but perhaps they want a prayer that would mark them as disciples of Jesus, as John had given them a prayer that showed them as disciples of John. So that seems to be maybe the background for this particular question and observation. Now this is illustrated by Jesus telling a parable, often called the parable of the friend in need. This will be found in verses 5 and 8 of chapter 11, or as someone else calls this, the parable of the pushy pal. Now, again, it's a question of hospitality. Again, this issue keeps coming back again and again in the stories that Luke remembers. It begins by saying that a friend has a friend who visits him at midnight, comes late at night. And the friend who is to be the host discovers that he doesn't have sufficient food to offer to the traveler who comes. Now, you might smile at midnight and say, yeah, did he expect? Yes, he did expect it, okay? And the host, and in this case, so there are three kind of friends here. The one friend who is the host, the friend who comes, so that's number two, and now, well, you don't have enough food for the visitor. Where do you go? Well, you go to ask another friend if they could not, or he could not help you. Now, why would you not have, just as a kind of little background for all of these little stories here, what would you be expected to give them? Bread. Now, bread in villages, there were bakeries and people baked bread, but not every day. See, because there would only be one major oven for a village. So you had to space, so one day one family would bake the bread, the next day another. And so if you're thinking of fresh bread right away, well, think again, okay? But you had to have enough bread sufficient to meet the needs of the visitor, okay? And how that would be measured is that once the visitor had eaten the bread, there would be left over. So you didn't just give, gee, I only got a little bit left here, try that. No, you had to give them the full shot. So all of that is a little bit of a background to say that bread baked weekly coordinated or brought the village or the community together when it came to sharing bread. So he now goes to his friend, and we don't know, he knocks on the door or how he does this, but says to his friend, I need help, I need food. Friend looks out the window and says, we're all asleep here, it's late at night, I can't help you. Now, so here's the third friend, see, friend. However, and this parable sometimes gets the idea that if you are persistent, you get what you need. So he says, look, I really need to take care of this, the needs of my visitor. And the parable says he gets up not because of friendship, but because of, and the Hebrew word here is not persistence, but is shamelessness. He does not want to be shamed because he could not provide hospitality or bread for the visitor. So you see, this again comes to the quality that hospitality is often mentioned by do not shame someone. To shame someone or to shame a family or to shame a community would be one of the most terrible things that you could do. So again, it's important, and that's what we've been kind of discussing in these sessions, the importance of knowing the culture and tradition that was going on in the first century world of Jesus and his contemporaries. I say first century world because it included certainly Jesus and his time, but also Luke and his time, which was a few years later. So he says, he gets up and helps the man who is asking for bread because he doesn't want to be shamed. And I say he, but keep in mind that this third friend, if he did not provide the necessary food for the traveler, would bring shame not only to himself, but also to the whole village or town. So there's this always communal aspect that's at work in these things that we need to be aware of. So the avoidance of shame is the good. The imprudence in begging his friend at such a late hour of the night might be bad, but nevertheless, it was the only way in which it could be done. So, and why getting up does the father of the family make some argument? We may have mentioned this before, but the sleeping arrangement in families was that the father slept at the opening, we would call it the window, closest to the road, because as travelers went by at any time, or animals, if stuff splattered up from the road, who would it hit? It would hit first the person closest to the window. Then, and they all slept in the same bed. So the father would be, husband would be sleeping there. Next to him might be his wife or the children, and then his wife. So for him to get up, you see, and this is why he is kind of saying, no, he would have to wake up to get over them, all of the others who were sleeping in bed with him. And you all know how it is sometimes when kids get up in the middle of the night and then they can't go back to sleep, and how difficult that is. See, so there's this human element here when he says, I really can't help you because the family's in bed now, or we're in bed for the night. Got to cancel that out in behalf of hospitality. So he does that. So there you have friend, and friend, all providing the necessary sustenance for the traveler. Yes, he came at an unfortunately late hour, but who knows? And of course, the parable doesn't need to explain this, why the friend is coming so late. He perhaps had some problems on the road, and that's why he arrives late. The section here now ends with some sayings of Jesus, where he says, ask and it will be given you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. So these are little adages we believe that Luke includes here now, because all of this has to do, certainly in some ways, with prayer. Prayer is asking the patron for help. The supreme patron, of course, as we saw a few minutes ago, is none other than God. But in this case, the patron would be the home of the friend, and then the friend's friend. For everyone who asks will receive, everyone who seeks will find, and everyone who knocks, the door will be open to you. So these are very popular little sayings which are included here, and certainly which have aspects of prayer. This is also then, Jesus uses a couple of analogies here. If a child asks for a fish, would you give him a snake? And if a child asks for an egg, would you give that child a scorpion? Now, some of you parents may smile and say, maybe I would. But the point of the parable, and you can say these little sayings in their own way are little parables, is you wouldn't do that. Now, why would even this illustration be used? Because there was a kind of fish that was popular in the first century world that at first glance could look like a snake, or a snake could look like this fish. So you could trick the person. See, because you would say, well, obviously you know the difference between a fish and a snake. Yeah, that you would. But if there was a certain similarity, between this kind of fish and this kind of snake, then it might take a moment after you've done it for the discovery to be made. Similarly, that can be said with regard to an egg and a scorpion. A scorpion looked like an egg when it was kind of curled up like that. And so would you trick someone? They asked for an egg, and instead you would give them a scorpion. Well, you wouldn't, okay? And that's exactly what Luke pictures Jesus as saying. If you ask for good things from God, God will give you good things. God is not going to trick you. God will not give us bad things. That is not God's intent. If that's true about God, then should that not also be true of the way in which we deal with one another? We should always be, says this parable, the good host. Does not mean that we always have everything at hand that the guest would need, but we will go out of our way, even if we have to borrow food from someone else or goods to help the neighbor in need. That, of course, goes back to a very popular theme, does it not? That the guest who arrives, the friend who arrives, rather, is in need. And very practically, as we kind of come to the conclusion of this story, go back again that someone arriving at midnight might really be very hungry, particularly if you've been on the road for a long period of time. So there is a given need on the part of the friend who is visiting that is very real. Bread, of course, traditionally is considered to be the food of nourishment. And as I mentioned, it may well simply be bread, but maybe there was other sustenances and foods that would be necessary. Can a friend impose upon a friend? Well, that's, of course, another issue to reflect on. Friendship means that you do not have to beg from another when you have need, but it is willingly given. Those of you who have friends may smile and say, well, sometimes that may not work exactly that way. But what is importantly illustrated here is that when all three of the friends work together, and notice here again is a dynamic that usually is used by Luke in telling good stories, three, okay? Three friends, three needs. Does the visitor have a need? Yes. Does the one who is visited have a need? Well, yes, he needs to demonstrate in a practical way friendship. Does the third friend who is imposed on have a need? Yes, he needs to provide that hospitality, which is representative, and as I mentioned, not only of his own family, but also of the family itself, of the village. And if you think about it, if someone is standing there calling out, look, I need bread, I need help, don't you think that there are others around in the neighborhood who hear the same thing? That's a point sometimes that might be overlooked here. It isn't just the relationship that happens between these three, but again, in another way which is very common in the way in which Jesus' message is presented, is that it is communal. The community, the village, knows what's going on. And when these two friends provide food for the visitor, then the friendship of the community is also extended to that person. So the dynamic of the communal is also very much at work here. So once again, hospitality is the quality that is brought out as we hear how Jesus teaches to pray, and we should forgive our debts. By the way, the word debt here is well used, by the way, by Luke, because debt involves money, something which you owe to another. We will see this again in looking at stories that Luke tells, where practical things like money and goods are at hand. Well, once again, Be hospitable this week to one another. Thank you for joining us.